Great. Good evening, friends. I'm going to wait a couple seconds for everybody to kind of settle in. We have a very exciting talk tonight. I'm Barbara Van Dillen. On behalf of the Burlingame Country Club Entertainment Committee, I'd like to welcome you to our second Zoom webinar. I hope you and your families are well and staying healthy during this difficult time. And I know I speak for all of us about how much we miss seeing each other with the club. And we remain hopeful that we can gradually start going to use the club again soon. So before we get started, I wanted to point out the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. This will give you an opportunity to ask questions and make comments at the end of the talk. Our talk will be about 20 to 25 minutes. And so we'll be able to get to most of your questions. So I would like to add now to our webinar, our speaker. Bill, can you join us?
Here we are.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, good to see you, Barbara.
You too. Thanks for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and be with us tonight.
Glad to be here. It's strange. Usually when I talk, there's people you talk to. Looking at a computer and talking, you feel a little insane, but I'm sure there are people out there.
I know. I'm not quite used to it myself either, so we'll do the best we can.
Yeah, like the Warriors playing basketball without any fans.
Good analogy. Oh gosh. Well, we're trying to do this. We're doing this speaker series as a way to kind of engage members during this difficult time, and so we're really looking forward to tonight. So before I'd like to start out by giving a little introduction about you, Bill, and let everybody know what you've been doing for many years. First of all, I'd like to start out by saying that Bill and his wife, Mary, have been members of Burlingame for over 40 years. They're dear friends to so many of us. But before I get into Bill's extraordinary professional accomplishments, I think it's worth noting that he's quite the competitor on the golf course. And he's won the Erskine Cup with Jim Davidson 3 times. Bill is 83 years young, although you would never know it. He first shot his age at 74, and then has shot his age every year since, many times over. When he was 81, he shot a 75 with the Saturday Morning Gang. One final tidbit about Bill's game is that he's played in the Pebble Beach Pro-Am 14 times, and 1 year finished in 5th place. 1 year, Bill had a hole-in-one on number 7 at Pebble during the tournament. So Bill, I hope they played that replay many times on national TV for you.
They didn't have to. I play it all the time in my head.
For Bill's professional career, Bill graduated from Kenyon College in Ohio and Virginia Theological Seminary, serving in parishes and churches in West Virginia and Washington, D.C. In 1979, he was elected as the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of California and served churches, schools, and dozens of social ministries here in the Bay Area. During his time as bishop, Bill was an early pioneer in responding to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Over 2 decades, he was on the board of the American Foundation for AIDS Research. He is known for his incredible work with the homeless in association with St. Luke's Hospital, and Bill worked closely with people in alcohol and drug rehabilitation, Latino immigrant ministries, and the care for the elderly. Bill's most extraordinary work began in 1996 and founded United Religions Initiative, and now serves as its president. URI is the world's largest international interfaith organization. In his work and travels, Bill has met with such religious leaders as the Pope, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. I highly recommend that you watch Bill's TED Talk, as it provides an overview of his mission in bringing together people of all faiths for the greater good, and he has now dedicated his life to this cause. We will be including this TED Talk in the link in our follow-up email. Most recently, Bill was a nominee for the Visionary of the Year Award, sponsored by the San Francisco Chronicle, and was honored in 2018. We're so fortunate to have a person of Bill's stature as a member, and we are grateful tonight that he will share his thoughts and insights about coping during these unprecedented times. Bill, thanks so much. We're really looking forward to having you speak.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for that introduction. Wow. Also, I'd like to begin by thanking Burlingame Country Club and for the folks inviting me to speak. I feel honored to be among my peers and friends to be talking about something that really is important. Our interior lives during the coronavirus. We are all struggling to understand the nature of the virus. We are all moved by the human tragedy, loss, grief, and suffering that we see constantly on the news. And we all fear that it's only going to get worse. Plus, there is the surprise factor, wondering if this virus will eventually make itself at home in us and in those dear to us. How do we make sense of this pandemic, inward sense? Yes, there's a healthcare pandemic going on, and yes, an economic pandemic, but there's also an internal pandemic that must be faced in our souls, our psyches, our spirits. What's going on outside is historic right now, and it demands the deepest and best responses that we can make internally. Some brave workers are rushing to hospitals to lay their lives on the line. Other people are buying more guns. Some people are howling and banging pans in honor of medical staffs. Some are gouging prices. Some are giving blood, while others are committing domestic violence. We, too, are trying to find our place in the pandemic. That's it, our place in this pandemic. That's what I'm going to be talking about this evening. So here are 3 categories that might help in discerning our personal place. The first category of our interior outline is this: accepting that our inward pandemic is real. This is real, the stuff that's going on inside us right now. David Brooks, columnist for the New York Times, guessed that people were hurting inwardly because of the coronavirus epidemic. So he invited anyone who felt duress to get in touch with him. Immediately, over 6,000 people responded. And those people fell into 3 categories. First, and surprisingly, were the young people. Their dreams of making their way forward in an expanding economy completely evaporated in the twinkling of an eye. So now they can't eat or sleep or dream of a promising future for themselves. The second group that responded, as you might imagine, were seniors. Obviously, those in elderly care facilities. Then, seniors who live alone. But alone or not, we all realize that the pandemic is targeting us first of all and most of all. And finally, David Brooks heard from people who had underlying mental health issues: anxiety, panic, attacks, suicidal thoughts. These people plunged when the pandemic broke out. Come to think of it, back in the 1930s, the term the Great Depression must have meant more than an economic downturn. Until recently, you and I know you well, we've had delicious diversions. The Warriors, the Symphony, the Bridge Group, the Investment Group or Book Group, the 49ers, the driving range, not to mention our family gatherings. and dinners with our friends, often at the club. When the merry-go-round of delicious diversions stopped abruptly, then we came square up against a question that probably we have postponed for many years. And the question is, who am I now? Not my resume or my reputation or my comfortable niche in my social group, but who am I when there is silence all around me and I'm not going anyplace? The virus forces us to take stock of ourselves, and that is natural and necessary. Where is our place in this pandemic? Sheltering in place is our place. Our quiet inward struggles during this quarantine is where we wage our most powerful battle against the virus. Our warfare will never be newsworthy, but it will always be consequential. Our bravery in battle is enjoined in the silence of our inward selves at home. Here is where we accept that the pandemic is real. So that's the end of our first category. The second category of an interior outline is this: how to cope in a coronavirus pandemic. On Saturday mornings at Burlingame Country Club in the golfing gang, I often play in a threesome with Gus Benz and Mike Armacost. All of us well over 80 years old. Between us, we have lived more than 250 years. Who am I to lecture Mike and Gus on coping in a pandemic? The same goes for the audience that's listening to me now, probably. Some of you have lived through World War II, through the polio epidemic, through serious hospitalizations, through the death of loved ones, through the Korean or Vietnam Wars, through the drug culture and various addictions, and radical swings in our financial status. You already have a well-established survival instinct and coping mechanism. Eric Van Dillen tells me the other day, quote, "I've fallen in love with reading again." Others have cleaned closets and drawers. The brave and the really bored have even ventured into the garage with a broom. Some have adopted exercise regimes. Some take walks. Favorite movies and Netflix shows are making the rounds. Old friends from the past are getting in touch, and we find ourselves in unhurried conversations for a change. Walter Heyman says to me, "I used to be more into doing, but now I'm more into being." Not doing, but being. I translate that comment into this glorious springtime. Instead of merely glancing at the budding, we can actually take the time to savor the beauty up close. The big news for Mary Swing and me last week was Peter Dunn's 90th birthday. Peter lives at the other end of Pepper Avenue, the high rent district, as we say. Background here, Mary and I haven't quite mastered Instacart. So recently we received a gallon of dill pickles, 20 pounds of flour, and 8 quarts of chicken broth. So to celebrate Peter's birthday, we decided to make a care package for Peter. A large jar of pickles, 5 pounds of flour, and a quart of chicken broth. I suggested that we throw in a roll of toilet paper, but Mary said, "Look, we love Peter, but not that much." When I feel excessively confined in our house, like you probably do too, but when I feel excessively confined, I think of a sign that I recently saw which said, quote, Anne Frank and 7 other people lived in an attic of 450 square feet for 761 days, trying not to be noticed. Anne Frank and 7 people lived in a little attic for 761 days, trying not to be noticed. I don't feel so bad about being confined. On the radio recently, I heard this scenario. Quote, if you were in a bank and a robber came in and began shooting, and he shot you in the arm, would you say, was I ever lucky? He could have hit me in the heart and killed me. Or would you say, why me? Of all the people in the bank, why was I the one who was shot? The moral of the story is that you alone have control of your own narrative. You are the only one who decides to choose the negative or the positive way to make sense of your life, especially now in a pandemic. You choose. Today, the streets are silent. Airports are silent. You and I are silent a lot. What we do inside ourselves matters greatly. So breathe slowly and deeply. Meditate. Pray. Sing. Write a journal. Ask for help. Revisit the places where you felt closest to the divine. There are invisible resources that are all around you. If you are cultivating your interior life, then start now. We all need to get better at coping. Old dogs, new tricks. That's the end of my second category. The final category of an interior outline is this, quote, the big picture. Here is the big picture story from a past pandemic, one that I was involved in. That is the AIDS pandemic. When that outbreak occurred, lots of Bay Area parishioners whom I knew very well suffered and died, even deacons and priests. And when the frontline AIDS physicians of San Francisco learned that I had a close relationship with George H.W. Bush, who had been a former parishioner of mine in Washington, D.C., they asked me to go to Washington and pass on their advice, which I did when he was vice president and later president. The doctors in San Francisco would give me an AIDS plan for the nation, and I would go to the White House and present it. The president would always surround me with 3 other people. Dr. Anthony Fauci from NIH, Tony, Dr. Burton Lee from Sloan Kettering, and Dr. Everett Koop, the Surgeon General. I would present a nationwide approach to AIDS. The others in the room would critique it. George would take copious notes, and eventually he came up with the nation's approach to the AIDS pandemic. It was big picture for me in the midst of a pandemic. Now here is a second big picture story. A few months ago, I heard someone on the radio say these words: I am 90 years old, and in not so many years from now, I won't be here. And in not too many years after that, There will come a time when no one on earth will have ever met me. He went on to say, here is what life is about. You get on the bus. You ride the bus. The bus stops and you get off and the bus goes on. What the old man's words did for me was to place the big picture subject of death squarely in front of my face, just like the coronavirus does. It demands that we think about death, certainly our own death. If I do that personally, my first thoughts are these, quote, I don't want my wife Mary to die of this virus. I don't want to suffer long if I get it. And if I die, what is next? After I go, what will happen to the people I love most dearly and the causes I care about most passionately? Those are my first thoughts about death. I invite you to voice your own to yourself. What are yours? The coronavirus causes us to consider the big picture. Now, here is the biggest big picture story to come out of the coronavirus pandemic. And it goes beyond the end of the virus. This big story has to do with the new world that could be forming now that the good old days are passing away. We get glimpses, for the better, of what life on this earth might become. Today, many people of India are seeing the Himalayas for the first time in their lives, even though they live not far away from these 27,000 foot mountains. The smog was so great they just couldn't see the beauty in front of them. And now they can because of the coronavirus. Today in Yemen, an unthinkable and fragile ceasefire is holding on. A peace treaty in eastern Ukraine is being negotiated because of the coronavirus. Today, rivers are cleaning themselves. Today, we have new insight into the vital importance of public health. Today, we are concerned about distributing food to the starving in Pakistan and in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in South Sudan, in San Antonio, Texas. This world is in need of a course correction. And the coronavirus is providing us with an array of promising directions for a new big picture. Today, every country in the world is unified in fighting the same common enemy. Let me just say that again. Today, every country in the world is unified. The world is unified fighting a common enemy. A virus has done what no leader could have possibly produced. It leapt over boundaries of religions, nations, cultures to show us that we are all in this together. Those words have meaning every place. Can we hold on to this deep global revelation and build a more humane world? We have been given a brief glimpse of a new earth. And if you have seen it, then you are deputized by the moral force of the universe to build it. Viruses have consequences. Hope springs forth in the big picture. So that's it. 3 categories. Number 1, accepting inwardly that the pandemic is real. Number 2, coping with the pandemic. And number 3, seeing the big picture in the pandemic. I thank you all at Burlingame Country Club for inviting me to speak, because you forced me to arrange my thoughts, and it was good for me. Your invitation was good for me. Thank you. Barbara, back to you.
Bill, thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to remind people that are watching this that you have an opportunity to ask Bill questions. If you go down to your Q&A at the bottom, you can type in your questions or comments. We'd love to receive them, and then we will have Bill respond to them. So, so Bill, that was so many things to think about as we all cope with this. I wanted to kind of finish on that last note, is that this pandemic and coronavirus has cut all boundaries, countries, race, religion, socioeconomic groups. And I wanted to ask you, how are all the nations coming together on this how are all the faiths coming together in your work with URI? What's the work that's being done there?
Yeah, thank you. What happens, let me just go off to the side for a second. If you have the Olympics, which we're not going to have in Japan this year, but if you have the Olympics, you have all the nations of the world together in one place. And all of a sudden there's a sense of unity that although we're competing against each other, we're part of each other. So once the pandemic comes along, one country is sending supplies to another country, and other countries are saying, you're ahead of us, can you help us, etc. And there's a sense of we need to stop the fighting for a while. We need to stop the old things that separate us. We've got to get through this, and the only way we're going to get through it is to get through it together. So the coronavirus, something like this happens every 100 years. Something like the Olympics happens every 4 years. Where I work, the United Religions, that happens every day. We bring all the religions of the world, all the countries of the world, all the cultures of the world together to build cultures of peace, justice, and healing. And so the vision that the coronavirus is painting with the big picture is the same big picture that causes us to go to work at United Religions Initiative every day. We have Muslim and Jews and animists and Jains and Zoroastrians feeding people in Pakistan today, working with young people in Yemen today, working in Uganda today. We're all over the world doing this every day. So what I see in the pandemic is the same thing that I see in URI, that it crosses all the boundaries, all the borders, and it brings a common sense of global family. If we're ever going to make it as a planet Earth, we've got to come to some understanding of a global family, for the sake of the environment, for the sake of health of the people, etc.
There was a question here talking about coming together, of how this, are you hopeful that this challenge will bring us together in our divided country, or do you think it will contribute to more divisiveness?
Boy, in the United States of America, that's really a big issue, because one group is trying to say it's kind of your fault, so many deaths because of you, and the other is kind of saying, well, it's your fault because of blah, blah, blah. And I think the political divide is keeping us from accepting our common humanity. When we see those things on the news of the folks running into the ICU unit, we're not asking whether they're Republicans or Democrats. We're not asking whether the person died as a liberal or a conservative. We're not calling them names. We're not undermining them. They're just they're lifting up a humanity that makes the rest of our humanity looks a little shallow.
Mhm.
The divisiveness doesn't build up anything; it just tears down. So I think we're living through a reality that's challenging us to listen to our better angels. And if we can't get away from our biases, uh, a whole pandemic has been lost on us.
Mhm. There's some thoughts here about people in our busy lives. And some people are commenting that they like the simplicity and the opportunity now to stay in the presence. And they don't want to really go back to that busy lifestyle that they had. And so the question is, this really is an opportunity for people to reassess their lives and think through kind of how they lived their lives before and what they think about moving forward. Do you have any thoughts on that, Bill?
Other than I certainly agree with them. Whoever wrote that down, uh, I certainly understand what you're saying. Um, I maybe it's a matter of age because you want a simpler life the older you get. Uh, but being a competitor, I'm cheering for the West Virginia Mountaineers and for the Huntington High School football team, and it's stupid how many things I cheer for and follow. And the Cincinnati Reds, all the way down to the farm system, every earn run average of, and I want to win everything, and I want to keep up on everything, and it's kind of crazy. And this virus, just the sports page. I used to live for the green section. The green section takes 60 seconds to read now. And like, what are you going to do with the rest of the day? I could live with a little less sports.
I think
Not happily, maybe, but it'd be good for me.
Eric.
No, I think all of us are seeing that we could peel back. We were doing too much. We could peel back.
Well, one of the things I find so incredibly refreshing is the fact that there are so many families out walking and riding bikes. Here in San Mateo Park, Eric, who grew up here, said that it reminds him back in the 50s and 60s with just all of these kids riding their bikes all around the neighborhood. So that is certainly a silver lining. There's a question here that you mentioned young people and their unique perspective on the challenges associated with the virus, which is including looking beyond the imminent threat of health and well-being to the longer-term consequences for their lives as adults. What are your suggestions for them to put the crisis of future opportunity into perspective?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to my mind would be that things are cyclical. Just because it's the way it is today is not the way it's always going to be. And the way it was 6 months ago is not the way it was always going to be. Every generation, you have to dig yourself out. So I lived through a lot of the Depression, and most people live through the Depression really hit a lot of people. I feel like a Depression baby. I don't want to run the water very much. I want to eat leftovers. I want to make things stretch. The Depression helped form me, but I lived into a affluent society. So, you make you adjust. But I think the biggest thing would be, as a young person, is to only bite off as much as you could chew for right now. If there's some skills that you need to learn, if there are things that you're not too good at that you could get better at, if you could hone your skills, you don't have to get it all at once. a lot of times, I mean, I spent 6 years in a room that was 7 feet by 10 feet, learning to be a parish priest in a little steel town in a plumbing garage. Uh, life wasn't so prosperous looking for me, but you duck your head and you do the things that you learn your craft. You hone your skills, and later on there'll be other possibilities, and when those possibilities come, you're ready for them. But if you don't hone your skills, you're not going to find your game when you get to the big leagues. You make your game when you're in the minor leagues.
Yeah, to use this time as an opportunity to pursue those things that you will need in the future. So it's one way of looking at it. There's a number of comments here about the thought about the people in India being able to see the Himalayas, and the whole concept of the role of nature. Mother Nature has taken a big exhale right now. Certainly one of the silver linings of the epidemic or the pandemic. Do you think that there's a question here, do you think that this will make people become more aware of climate change and things that are happening in our environment? And what do you think that'll look like?
I think there's a big running head start at this. It's not just today. I think corporations, it's not just students and young people who are environmentalists. It's corporations and companies finding out they can make money by being good to the environment. More and more people are getting the message, and even though a lot of the guidelines are being rolled back at this time, that's not going to last. People have a vision of a cleaner world, the necessity of a cleaner world, the fear of a not cleaner world and what's going to happen. And I think temporarily it looks like there have been a lot of setbacks in the environment, but that's not going to last. I think the glimpse of the Himalayas and Beijing, and that we got it. We see it now. We know what we didn't know. We know what the world looks like. And if once you get a vision of what the world looks like, it's hard to turn back. I think the Native Americans have had it all along. They're the ones who consistently, they fell in love with nature and stayed right with it, and they're still with it. We got to the Industrial Revolution when we said goodbye to nature. And now we got to the point where if we don't say hello to nature pretty quick, it's going to be too late.
Right. I think so many people agree with that. The lack of air and noise pollution, I think, has raised a great deal of awareness about this issue. And what do you think the role of religion is in the pandemic, in the final analysis? That's a question.
Yeah, I belong to a little parish church nearby, and you can't go to it. And so they're on the computer every Sunday morning, and they're very creative. And then I began to look at other churches and other religions, and people are, I think there's going to be a religious revival coming out of this. Religion was kind of, the professionals, the priests, the rabbis, the imams were in control. You know, they were setting the agenda, and the people in the pews did their part. But now that there's nobody in the pews, and there's kind of like a Protestant Reformation going on for everybody, including the Protestants. I think now that nobody's in Saudi Arabia, not the million people going around the circle saying their prayers, I wonder about him. What's going to happen to Islam? What's going to happen to Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, etc.? And I think that it's going to be more of an amateur hour in religion. It's not going to be so much guided by the experts. I think if you let if the only way to have religion is to put a shrine up in your house, you'll do that. When Russia became communist and atheists, and they tore down churches, the people who kept the faith alive were not the priests or the bishops. Mm-hmm. It was the grandmothers mm-hmm. who told the stories of the faith to the grandchildren. And so that's, I think we're going to have a revival of religion because of the coronavirus.
Interesting. What do you think about the social inequality issues that have emerged through this, and what kind people are asking? What kind of difference can people make on a local basis, and just kind of your thoughts about dealing with the stress of this and being able to give back as being one of the coping mechanisms.
Yeah, to look at the statistics about who is suffering from the coronavirus in the meat packing places, and the Hispanic, the people of color, Black, brown, the inequality of who's getting the disease and who's dying, those are stark. I mean, you just can't run and hide or gloss over that. I think as this pandemic winds down, there's got to be a new. It goes way beyond voting rights. Mm-hmm. It's got to be health. It's got to be education. There's so many things that we've got to work on as a human family in this country, and in this country, for instance. So I think what happens is that the coronavirus has just taken a great big spotlight and put it down on race. Mm-hmm. And you see it in the statistics, and you can't hide from it. Right. So it demands a response.
Right. And it's also it raises awareness and gives people an opportunity to think through kind of what are the things that we can do, if you have the time, if you have the resources to be able to support organizations that are going to need that now more than ever, is something that I think we all can think about.
Yeah. And also, what human beings do you know who are really struggling right now? Yeah. And who works for you, and make sure that they're okay. And, it gets very personal. It gets very personal when people are out of jobs. And so everybody's got to, not only what organizations, but what individuals. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Right. There's a question here, Bill, about the lessons from the AIDS epidemic, and that you think that what lessons should we be bringing to the COVID-19 situation?
Yeah. One of the things that when I started working on the AIDS epidemic, the evangelical Christians were saying AIDS was God's punishment and judgment on the homosexual community. And so mainline Christians wouldn't touch it because it was too hot to handle. It was a lot of gay people dying. And the evangelicals were saying, God is killing them. Mm-hmm. This time around, you don't hear the evangelicals saying this is God's punishment on the heterosexual community. Mm-hmm. They're very quiet about this. All of a sudden, God's not choosing sides around who's dying, which I think we're getting a little better at as a religious community, and we're seeing it more as, well, we're all in this together. The evangelicals and the mainliners and the Jews, Muslim, etc. But the AIDS epidemic, it was initially mostly gay disease. It was called a gay disease early on, before it even had a name. But now this is heterosexual and gay, and everybody's got this, young, old, no matter what. It's an equal opportunity disease, and therefore it's no longer a small group of people who are defending work in AIDS. Everybody now is behind the work that needs to be done, the research that needs to be done, the healthcare that needs to be done, the funds that need to be raised, the whole works. So we're, as a nation, we're much farther along than we were with the AIDS epidemic. And in those days, I remember on the American Foundation for AIDS Research, I mean, I'd go to a church in San Francisco and there'd be 25 people dead, average age 36.
Wow.
I'd go to another church, there'd be 40 people dead, average age 36. And that was not just a statistic. These are people we knew and we loved, and we prayed with them as they died, and took care of their parents and their lovers and loved ones. And you know, it just beats down day after day after day, all those deaths. And I remember being on the American Foundation for AIDS Research when there was no hope, there was no virus, and there's no vaccine, there was no treatment. And we came up with a slogan which was said, we're in for the cure. That's where we take our stand. We're in for the cure. And regardless of how bad it was, we were there, and we were going to be there. And sure enough, treatment started. We still don't have a magic bullet for AIDS, and a magic bullet for coronavirus might not come for a long time, but treatment might come. I listened to Tony Fauci today saying, you know, if you could stop it here, then you could stop it other places. And I was thinking, I remember hearing that before. That's the same kind of language I heard from Tony 20 years ago or whatever, 30 years ago, whatever, 40 years ago.
Huh. With your role as bishop, can you tell us, give us a little bit of an idea of what it was like to be the bishop during that time? I know during your TED Talk, that Dianne Feinstein, when she was the mayor, had called you and said, we have this problem called homelessness. And then you have homelessness and the AIDS that you were dealing with. Can you tell us what it was like to be, dealing with such massive issues so early on in those problems? And secondly, kind of what is it like to be a bishop?
Right. Things were coming fast and furiously there for a while with the Rodney King riots. What do you do about that? A whole bunch of folks, Black Episcopalians, met in our living room, and we started a capital development bank for helping folks who were redlined at banks to get loans for houses or for starting businesses. So I became a banker. St. Luke's Hospital, been there for since 1871, and I was on the board. That was our hospital, and we were hemorrhaging at about $25 million a year, and other hospitals were going down like crazy. How do you save a hospital in south of Market with the only private hospital except for the little Chinese one south of Market? How do you save that? And then there was the earthquake, which we had an earthquake. And then there was the AIDS before that. And then there was the Oakland Hill fire, which was the biggest one in American history. And and then you have 400 priests, and you have 87 churches, and you have 65 things, and then the homeless. I started housing homeless at Grace Cathedral. The first night there were 40 people. The second night there were 250 people, and then the homeless started shooting up, and the needles were all around where the kids were. And the people in Nob Hill said, "Look, we're glad you're trying to do something. Don't do it in our. This is destroying Nob Hill. Get them out of here." So how you go south of Market, get a building, have a program. We started out with 40 people the first night. We ended up with 1,500 people, and we've been housing 1,500 people for the last 30 years. We house 60% of all the homeless in San Francisco who are housed.
Mhm.
So there's the day thing. I mean, the Sunday thing where you go to church, and then there's the other societal things that come at you. And then, just to make it more interesting, how about starting a United Religions Initiative all over the world? so it was a good workout. Every day, it really kept you alive. It kept me alive. I felt totally engaged and very happy to be involved in all of it.
Mhm. And then you started URI, and you had this vision of bringing all these world religions together, and that is such an ambitious vision, and it's been tremendously successful. Can you share with us a little bit about your leadership and your role with URI?
Sure. What happened was that in 1993, I was sitting in my office and the phone rang, and it was the United Nations, and they said they wanted to come to San Francisco for the 50th anniversary of the UN. They said, "We want to have a big celebration. Could we have it at Grace Cathedral?" And I said, "Sure, be honored." And they said, "Well, our what we want to do is have all the nations of the world there in this service, and all the religions of the world. So we'll bring all the nations of the world. And we want you to bring all the religious leaders of the world together." And I said, "Well, I'm not doing anything this afternoon. I'll just call the Pope and the Dalai Lama and everybody and just get them all there." And you go to bed at night and you say, "Why did I say yes to that?" And then I thought, there's never going to be peace among nations unless there's peace among religions, and there's never going to be peace among religions until somebody gets them together. And so I thought, as stupid as it is, I'm going to go out to try to get all the nations or all the religions of the world together around something. So I went around and visited every religious leader I could think of, and they all told me no, they wouldn't participate in that. So I thought, okay, what's going to happen? But it's not going to happen at the top. It's going to happen at the bottom of religion. It'll be the grassroots people. They have the freedom and the latitude to move around and meet each other. The guys at the top, they don't have a chance to meet each other and work together. People at the bottom do. So then the issue is, how do you do that? So I went to the guy who invented the Visa card, D. Hock, and I said, "What you did with banking, could I do with religion?" And he said, "Yeah, we could do that, but you'll have to sit with me for 3 years." So I sat with him, 14 of us, for 3 years, and we came up with an organizational design based on nature, not on the Industrial Revolution, top down, but how you build something from the bottom up. And so we did everything that D. Hock told us to do, we did, and it's worked almost as well as Visa. We haven't made a lot of money. we don't have any money, but it works exactly the way it works, like nature. It grows itself every day, because in every community something has to happen and change has to happen, and the only way it's going to happen is that the religions get together and make it happen. If the religions can get together in a village in Africa, you can get a well, or you can get an ambulance, you could get a blood drive, but you couldn't get it if you couldn't get the religious together.
And it's grown to be the largest interfaith organization in the world in 76 countries, right?
Yeah, it's 108 countries.
Oh, wow.
We're in a majority of the countries of the world now. And again, it grows the way Dee Hock, I go to bed at night, I don't do a thing. And the next morning I wake up and it's grown again. So it's terrific.
Yeah. Well, in these final minutes, Bill, I think that you've been able to share with us some ideas of coping and thinking about how we are going to remember ourselves and our families during this time, and think about the lessons that we've learned, the silver linings that have happened to all of us, how we've been able to react to the pandemic with our own attitudes, and things that we'll take forward. So I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. And did you have some final comments before we wrap this up?
No, I'm gonna go over to the club tonight and get dinner. So the club means a lot to me. Also, I saw in the newspaper today that golfing in San Mateo County is coming. Yeah. So I am up and I can't wait for dinner and I can't wait for golf. And I'm very grateful to you, Barbara. I think you're a wonderful hostess. And I thank Burlingame for inviting me to speak. I feel honored. Thank you.
Thank you. I know I asked Eric Leland today, I said, is there any way I can announce, like maybe the golf course might be opening soon, but.
You would be beloved.
Yeah, we'll leave that to the board. So anyway, that concludes our evening. I want to give a big shout out to thank Patty Constantini and her husband Charlie, both who were working the back, texting us while this webinar was going on and help us figure this out. Bill and I are very, very new to webinars. And we welcome your comments and feedback on these webinars, and very open to suggestions for other topics. Please feel free to step up. You can moderate too and provide suggestions. Anyway, thank you all. And we are sending everybody best wishes for a safe, happy future.